President Trump filling the world in on his view of North Korea. We're covering all of the angles, from China's involvement to Trump's view of the possible summit with Kim Jong-un. Plus, Republicans and Democrats on the same page when it comes to fixing the prison system. As the House prepares to vote, the congressman who introduced a new bill joins me live. And could legalize sports gambling be a game changer? What it could mean for fans and leagues at the top of the hour.
We are working on something, and, there's a chance that it'll work out. There's a very substantial chance that it won't work out. I don't want to waste a lot of time, and I'm sure he doesn't want to waste a lot of time. So there's a very substantial chance that it won't work out, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it won't work out over a period of time, but it may not work out for June 12th. But there's a good chance that we'll have the meeting.
President Trump, deal maker and chief. At his summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, will it happen? Maybe. Maybe it will be delayed past the scheduled June 12th date, or maybe it won't happen at all. Let's bring in Power Panel now, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, Caitlin Huey Burns, CEO and founder of Run for America, David Bernstein. Great to see you both. As we look at the situation, the president is keeping his promise of he's going to try to make it work, Caitlin. But he always said if the deal isn't good for this country, he doesn't sit down or he backs away.
Right. He has said that consistently. It was pretty jarring, though, to hear after they have agreed to the date and time and place to say, well, it may not happen after all. But
we weren't the first people to say that. Kim Jong-un was. He waited until that information was put in, and maybe that helps him propaganda-wise. I don't know.
Right. I mean, the whole question is, are these two sides trying to exert leverage over one another? The thing about the president is that President Trump really wants this to happen, and he's motivated in large part by being able to do something his predecessors weren't able to do. He talks about that a lot. Everybody kind of involved in all of this knows that. And so I think there is a lot of incentive for this president to reach a deal. But having said that, today, saying it may not happen raises all sorts of questions about what's coming next and what could happen tomorrow. Things could change.
To reach a good deal, not just reach a deal. He said he's not going to do what they did with Iran. You know what's interesting? Democrats have come around in some of the polling on the Hill now, looking at this as something potentially that could really change the world. Former President Jimmy Carter has said maybe the Nobel Peace Prize for this president if he makes it happen.
Well, I think it's if it happens, right? Which we're still, to be clear, a long way from happening.
And the difference, by the way, when Democrats tried to do this with Madeleine Albright is we didn't get this play-by-play.
Right. That's right.
We don't know how close. We don't really know the history because there hasn't been that kind of transparency.
I would argue, studying that history a little bit, it's pretty clear this is the closest we've ever come. And there's probably a calculation. You've got two people who are, could actually at this moment in time be perfect for each other in these two leaders because they have characteristics of unpredictability. But if it does happen, if we do get a deal, it is very hard for me to see how you could not give the people who constructed such a deal the highest honor that we give for these such things, right? Everyone in the world agrees that this is one of the most important global geopolitical strategic risks and threats. So it would be disingenuous to do that on the basis of
Talk to me about politics at home then, because is Democrats come out and speak about this, and Republicans have had their cautionary words for the president too. But is there a healing that can go on through is this big enough to heal the fissure that we have here in the United States too?
I don't know that it is big enough to heal all the fissures, but I would certainly hope that if we do come to a deal and it needs to be ratified by the Senate, or even if it doesn't need to be ratified by,
which is different too,
right? But that we're able to come together, because this is an example of something that is clearly good for the country and the world. And if this president can achieve it, great. I mean, Democrats should not cast aspersions on that because they don't like him.
All right, I want to talk about China's role in all of this, Caitlin. This is complicated. The president said after the second meeting between the Chinese President Xi and Kim Jong-un, he said, we saw a difference in North Korea. Quote, I don't like that.
Right. Well, the president has been trying to make strides in terms of his relationship with the Chinese president in order to not only for trade, but in order to kind of have this coalition of support as it pertains to North Korea. Remember last week, too, the controversy over the sanctions on ZTE, or the removal of those sanctions, talking about that really raised.
On that big phone company, which he talked about at the very end here.
Right.
Saying, look, we're going to leverage $1 billion in fines on those and on that. that company?
So a lot of players involved here, particularly that relationship is something that we've been watching throughout the course of the Trump administration on those two fronts. What I'm interested to see, though, in terms of this meeting is whether it happens or not, how the president kind of shifts his tone and approach. Remember, he came into this whole thing with little rocket man and really poking at North Korea. And there was a lot of talk that that was a different strategy that brought these conversations to where they are now. If the meeting, doesn't end up happening, does the president return to that approach, or does he do something different?
Quick thought on that, David?
Well, I think if the president doesn't, he's going to have to do something, right? He can't just walk away from the table on it, so he's going to have to.
But he says even if it doesn't happen now, he's a deal maker. He knows that it may not happen on a Monday, but it could things can change by Thursday.
Of course, that's true, but it seems to me this deal is moving towards some momentum. There are some blocks in the road, but if it's going to happen, this is the time where it's really going to happen.
Caitlin, David, thank you. It's been a very full, busy hour. We are awaiting the White House press briefing now. We'll be right back. From the Oval Office today with the president of South Korea. A lot of news made. We'll continue to cover it here right on Fox News Channel FNC for the cool kids.
Fox News Alert, we have a better idea about President Trump's view on North Korea after he and South Korea's president addressed the White House press for 40 minutes in the Oval Office. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. The two leaders discussing the planned June 12th summit between Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The president saying it would be in North Korea's interest to come to the table while also suggesting the meeting could be delayed.
I also have very strong opinions that North Korea has a chance to be a great country. And it can't be a great country under the circumstances that they're living right now. But North Korea has a chance really to be a great country. And I think they should seize the opportunity, and we'll soon find out whether or not they want to do that.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has more. John, you were there in the Oval Office. You tell me, do you think this summit's going to happen?
Well, the president himself told me on the way out that he thought it was 50-50. Last week when we were in the Oval Office with him, he asked me on the way out, what do you think about North Korea? He said, I think it's a coin toss. So I asked him the question on the way out today. I said, do you still think it's a coin toss? He said, yeah, it's a coin flip. He thinks that it's probably 50-50. The president has been very optimistic up until today, Dana, about the possibility of a summit. But we know what North Korea said last week, canceling planned meetings with South Korea, though it seems like those meetings with President Moon Jae-in may in fact go ahead sometime within the next week. The president saying last week, well, we don't really know what the North Koreans are up to, but we're still making plans. Today, he suggested that there's a very real possibility it won't happen on June 12th. Listen here.
We are working on something, and, there's a chance that it'll work out. There's a very substantial chance that it won't work out. I don't want to waste a lot of time, and I'm sure he doesn't want to waste a lot of time. So there's a very substantial chance that it won't work out, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it won't work out over a period of time, but it may not work out for June 12th.
May not work out for June 12th, as the president said. Maybe it'll work out later. The president really went further down the road as well in saying that he didn't like the outcome of the May 8th meeting that Kim Jong-un had with President Xi Jinping in the Chinese port city of Dalian. He said he knew about the first meeting that they had in Beijing, but this one in Dalian was a surprise. And he said that he noticed that there was a change in tone from North Korea, and he's wondering if Xi Jinping got in Kim's ear and said, look, you better slow walk this thing, this idea of a summit with the president of the United States, because he's going to want to get you to give up your nuclear weapons, which is why we saw President Trump last week and again today, Dana, saying directly to Kim Jong-un, listen, I will guarantee your security, both in terms of the nation itself and your personal security. We'll guarantee that you will stay in power, and we will guarantee that your economy flourishes. He even went so far as to say he knows that South Korea and China are willing to put a lot of money into North Korea to turn its economy around from the path that it's been on now. So this is a well, this is actually not live pictures. This is a tape from a little while ago, because Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, just drove by me before I came on the air. But here you see a tape playback of Moon Jae-in. Oh, actually, that's going in. That's his arrival. I'm sorry, I got the wrong information there. But at any rate, Dana, the president is trying to say to Kim Jong-un, come meet me in Singapore June 12th. It will be nothing but good for you if you do, but also reiterating that he's got to give up his nuclear program if he wants anything out of this.
Right. Those guarantees are interesting, and we should explore those over the next couple of weeks. But I also want to ask you about your question to him about Korean reunification. He's there with the South Korean president, who is definitely very keen to see this deal worked out. What did he tell you?
You know, this is the first time I think the president's ever talked about this. There are two ideas of Korean reunification. The South's idea of a unified Korean peninsula being a capitalist-oriented free market economy. And then you've got North Korea's interpretation of what the vision for reunification should look like. So I put the question to the president today, what he saw as the long-term vision for these talks with North Korea. Did he see two Koreas coexisting peacefully, or did he think that North Korean and South Korean reunification would be a good idea? Listen to how he answered.
Well, I think what's going to happen is you'll start off certainly with two Koreas, and then it's going to be largely up to them as to whether or not they get together. I see two Koreas, and then ultimately maybe someday in the future, wouldn't be now, but someday in the future maybe they'll get together and you'll go back to one Korea.
President Trump said that he would like to see a unified Korea, but only if North and South Korea agreed that that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
That's a very sensitive issue, particularly with China, Dana.
Indeed. John, thank you for that report. We appreciate it. So the North Koreans inviting a small group of foreign journalists to witness a destruction of its primary nuclear test site. Military analysts like General Jack Keane remain skeptical.
Given a widely held view that this nuclear test site collapsed as a result of the last major nuclear test that they conducted back in December, that it's probably a PR stunt, because therefore the site's not usable anyway, and they're trying to advertise it that they are dismantling this nuclear test site as a goodwill gesture to demonstrate that they are serious about denuclearization.
Dennis Wilder is a professor of Asian Studies at Georgetown University and former senior director for East Asian Affairs at the National Security Council. Dennis, I'm glad you're here today. You're the perfect guest on the perfect day to talk about it. So you know each of these countries individually, but you also look at the region of a whole, and you know the United States position. So let me just give you the floor to give me your impressions after the president's meeting today with the president of South Korea in the Oval Office.
I think the president is making some very smart moves here to be careful about the symmetry. The North Koreans clearly are feeling their oats a bit. They're going back to their old style. In part, I think the president's right, because Xi Jinping has been willing to have these two meetings with the North Korean leader, starting to talk about economic development of the North. The North is feeling like they've got their back covered by the Chinese. So now the president, watching that, is realizing that he's got to put the pressure back on the Chinese and on the North Koreans. So what he's saying is what we should be saying, which is, hey, we will have this meeting if the terms are right. If the terms aren't right, we can wait. One of the things, Dana, in the past that we've seen is American negotiators with the North Koreans too eager to find a way to get a deal. And when we do that, they take us for a ride, and they've taken us for several rides in the past.
Well, I do want to ask you...
I think the president is signaling... Yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask you about the South Koreans, because in this scenario, it seems like they are very eager. And today in the Washington Post, there was an op-ed by the South Korean ambassador to the United States. Let me read you one line. "We cannot afford to lose hope, however, that Kim may choose a different path from his father and grandfather. Unlike in the past, we have seen and are about to witness several significant diplomatic actions at the highest level among the main countries involved." What do you think about that dynamic between what the South Koreans want and what the Chinese want, and with the president saying, okay, well, look, I'm not coming over there. I'm not going to waste my time and fly all the way to Singapore for nothing. But the South Koreans are very keen to get this done.
Well, I was actually glad that the North Koreans, if you will, popped the bubble of the South Koreans a little bit by refusing to have these meetings and by refusing to have the South Korean reporters go to the test site. I think South Korea was getting way out on its skis on this and way too believing that there is a change in North Korea. Now, I do think Kim 3.0 is different than Kim 2.0 and 1.0. He did study in Switzerland. He is internet savvy. I think he is thinking that if he got the right deal for his people, there is the possibility that he would give up the nuclear weapons. I'm not as
But he
convinced
also
as
is
some people
different
that he
in
would
that
never give them up.
But it is also different for him in that he actually has the nuclear weapons, and the two previous Kims
right.
did not. Let me ask you about one other thing, which is China, because the president did talk about that before I let you go. I want to have you listen to this, because the president was obviously, as John Roberts reported, not that happy with how China may have weighed in here. Listen.
No, not really. I think that they're a start, but we need something. Look, China has been, I really call it a dereliction of duties to take advantage of us on trade the way we've been taken advantage of. So China, as an example, has made a fortune. I mean, a transfer of wealth like nobody's ever seen in history. They're the big one. They're almost all bad, but China's the big one. So, no, I'm not satisfied, but we'll see what happens.
Tell me what you think about that, Dennis.
These trade negotiations are really tough. It's between the world's two largest massive economies. Now, the Chinese, I think, are coming in trying to lowball the United States. And I think the president's right to say, we're not going to take crumbs off the table again. You've done very well off of our markets. You do very well every year off of our markets. What are you going to give us in return? How are we going to make this a fair, reciprocal relationship? And Liu He came, he put a few things on the table, more agricultural purchases, more LNG purchases from the United States. But what they didn't do was really talk about the structural change in the relationship that needs to happen, so that American companies get a fair shake and the American worker gets a fair shake. And that's what needs to happen.
They want to wrap me to go, but I have to ask you. So John Roberts asked the president, and the president said that he thinks that whether this meeting takes place on June 12th is a coin flip. It's 50-50. Where do you put it?
I think it's a little higher. I think it's 60-40.
Okay.
But I do think that it's pretty close to that.
All right. We'll hold you to it. All right. Dennis Wilder, thank you.
All right.
Some rare cooperation between Democrats and Republicans as Congress takes a first step toward improving the nation's prison system. The Republican in the House who introduced a bill to do just that will join me live. Plus, President Trump meeting with the Deputy Attorney General as he demands answers about the Russia investigation.
If they had spies in my campaign, during my campaign for political purposes, that would be unprecedented in the history. It would be one of the biggest insults that anyone's ever seen, and it would be very illegal, aside from everything else. It would make probably every political event ever look like small potatoes.
President Trump discussing the use of a confidential informant during the early stages of Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, which was a focus of his meeting yesterday with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and others. Michael Moore is a former U.S. attorney for the Middle District of Georgia, but here in New York today, and we're glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Let me ask you just about the process, because some critics say that President Trump was overstepping the line when it comes between some sort of separation between the Justice Department and the White House. But the president is the chief executive officer and oversees the Justice Department.
There's been a real history of having a separation there, because you want an independent Justice Department who can do investigations without political pressure. And, you know, Lady Justice is blind, and when they don't take a stand one way or another, they just want to get to the facts. I mean, what's interesting here, and I think what you see is it may not be illegal that he came and asked for the investigation, but it was probably ill-advised. And that is, he's already under investigation for potential obstruction charges and dealing in some part with how he handled Jim Comey. And the pressure he put there. And so now he's calling the Deputy Attorney General back into the Oval Office or into the White House, along with the new director of the FBI. And he's talking to him about a request for another investigation. And that could be seen as if he's trying to steer it one way or another.
So Rod Rosenstein, who's the Deputy Attorney General, says, OK, fine. I will ask the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, who apparently has a very good reputation.
He does.
People think he's very fair. And we're expecting any minute now this report from him about the Clinton email investigation and how the FBI handled that. But in the meantime, Rod Rosenstein has said, while you're at it, could I add this to your plate? So how long? I mean, this office isn't endless. But is the investigation endless?
Well, and I think that's a good point because, I mean, they've asked that the investigation wrap up, and Giuliani came out saying it was going to wrap up by September, but now they're throwing something else in the mix, and so that keeps it alive. And I think that's a problem for the administration, and it sort of keeps the story alive. At the same time now, we're talking about other things like whether or not there's a spy, which I think is a sort of a ridiculous proposition, but whether or not there's a spy in the Trump campaign versus some of the things that the independent counsel, special counsel has already found out.
Do you think there's, I don't know whether they're splitting hairs or maybe we just don't know enough information, but is it true that President Trump, if he wanted to, could declassify all of this information and just get it out there and then everybody can do their own investigation?
Well, I mean, the president has the authority to declassify things. I mean, there are a lot of things he could do. I mean, we've talked before about this is a money case, and we're following the money when we talk about the crux of the investigation. He could let his tax returns out. I mean, there are things that could be done to shorten the investigation, but this kind of activity and the suggestion that we move forward, and now with the House Republicans coming out wanting an additional special counsel.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Take a listen to Congressman Zeldin. He's from here in New York. He's calling for a second special counsel along with about 12 other Republicans on the House side. Listen.
These are historic, legendary agencies that require transparency and accountability regarding the misconduct that took place. We learned that the DOJ, FBI, or both appeared to have planted at least one person into Donald Trump's presidential campaign to infiltrate and surveil the campaign. This action alone reminds us of just how necessary this resolution is, as well as the appointment of a second special counsel.
I've heard people say, be careful what you wish for if you're asking for another special counsel. Does this just make everything, play out that much longer?
I think it does, and I think we're going to be talking again. One of the things the Republicans in the House are upset about is the whole FISA application and whether or not the application process was appropriate for the information to be used. I think that's a bad thing for them because a judge has already found that the information was credible enough to issue the warrant. It wasn't like the department just went out and grabbed a piece of paper and signed off on it. So I think what happens is now we're going to prolong the investigation. We're going to get back into some things and maybe plow over some ground that has sort of been passed over to this point.
So you worked at the Justice Department. You were a U.S. attorney. You're a man of the law. Are you concerned, though, that because the FBI seems to be so wrapped up and unable to defend itself or to talk about these things because the investigations are ongoing, that the damage to the credibility is going to be long-lasting?
I think so. The FBI has a great history of being one of the strongest investigative agencies in the world, and these continued knocks against the credibility of the FBI, the independent agents, the leadership there has been a problem, and it was a problem when the president was attacking Jim Comey, as we've gone through. So I worry about that. I think that you've got great professionals there who are just going to do their job, and they historically do it. But the FBI is just like other elements of the Justice Department. We just don't talk about cases while they're going on. We don't talk about investigations.
This is so frustrating because I'm sure I've worked at Justice Department. There's a lot that all of us don't know, so I don't pretend to know. Michael Moore, thanks for being here.
Great being with you.
All right, new developments in the case of a police officer killed after being run over by a vehicle. What we're learning about her and the 4 people arrested. Plus, the governor of Texas addressing gun safety minutes from now, 4 days after the latest deadly school shooting, as we learn more about the shootout between the police and the killer. Alert, we now know the identity of the Maryland police officer killed in the line of duty on Monday. Baltimore police say that 4-year veteran Amy Caprio was responding to a suspicious vehicle call when one of the suspects drove right at her. Authorities say they captured 3 other young men this morning in connection with her murder. All 4 are teenagers. One of them is already charged with first-degree murder. It's horrible. We are now minutes away from the governor of Texas holding a roundtable discussion on school safety, just days after 8 students and 2 teachers were killed at Santa Fe High School. We're also learning more about the victims and the heroism on that day. Casey Stiegel is live in Santa Fe. Casey, there's some activity at the school today.
Yeah, Dana, some students are being let back inside at least certain areas of Santa Fe High School back here to retrieve valuables, keys, cell phones, things that may have been left behind in the middle of the chaos that ensued here Friday morning in the middle of that school shooting. Clearly, large areas of the campus remain a crime scene and are off limits. But officers say they're escorting those students one-on-one, no cameras or cell phones allowed to be brought in. Now, as this happens here up in Austin right now, more than 160 miles away at the Texas State Capitol, Governor Greg Abbott is convening special roundtable discussions. We heard him talking about those. A mix of both Republican and Democratic lawmakers, educators, supporters of the Second Amendment even, to brainstorm and develop what Abbott calls swift solutions for making sure this is not repeated at any other Texas school. Remember, 10 were killed here last Friday. Dana, 8 students, 2 teachers, 13 more were hurt.
Since you've been on the ground there, Casey, give us a sense. How is everyone doing at the school?
Well, they're broken, and their heartbreaking stories continue to come out as the parents and friends and clergy start to share more about the horrors and the heroism that took place on this campus last Friday at a memorial service for Christian Riley Garcia. His pastor said that he had a very strong faith, not typical of most 15-year-olds, adding he and his mother spent Thursday night reading scripture together. Friday morning, he went to school. Pastor Keenan Smith says, we know the rest of that.
I was with the mother when she was told this news, that he was holding the doors shut, trying to give others time to get away. And of course, a shot came through the door and took his life.
Out of the 13 injured, 1 remains critical. This man, John Barnes, he was the school resource police officer shot while trying to engage the shooter. The sheriff of this county saying that the casualty count would have likely been much higher if it were not for his response. The other the safety resource officer that was here by engaging the suspect and convincing him to surrender. Dana.
All right, Casey, thank you. So it's primary day in 4 key states, and we're live in Georgia as voters choose the candidates who will run for governor in November. Plus, claims that Paul Ryan could leave his position early are being shot down by the House Speaker himself.
The members drafted me into this job because of who I am and what I stand for. I think members...
Republicans denying reports that Paul Ryan could be forced out as Speaker before he retires in January. It would clear the way for Kevin McCarthy to take over as Speaker before the November midterms. Both Ryan and McCarthy denying the reports today, while House Republicans express support for the Speaker.
No, he doesn't need to step down. He's the Speaker of the House, was elected by our conference, and he's doing a fine job. We'll solve this.
How are you going to solve it?
I'm not going to. Leadership's going to. That's leadership's job. That's what they'll work on. We do need to come together. We're in the majority. We need to act like a majority instead of acting like a minority.
Marianne Marsh is a former senior advisor to Secretary John Kerry and a principal at Dewey Square Group. And Charlie Hurt, opinion editor at the Washington Times and a Fox News contributor. Both good friends. Glad to have you here. Charlie, is this just because Paul Ryan has decided to remain as Speaker but announced that he would retire at the end of this term? Are these stories about the possibility of him being forced out just going to be like a perennial every Tuesday? It's going to come up?
Yeah, I think that without a doubt, it's kind of an odd situation. I mean, if he it's sort of, and he kind of said it himself by, as you say, announcing that he wasn't going to run again, but that he would hold on to the speakership. It's never a fun time to be a speaker of this this Republican Party. But he had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the position. But I do think that it would probably be smart for Republicans if they present a positive, concrete agenda that they can run on, and I think a new face would go a long way towards doing that.
Marianne, I know that the Democrats had been in the lead on the generic ballot for most of the year, but that the margin is narrowing. We also have reports today that the Cook Political Report is moving 4 seats towards the Republicans, from toss-ups to lean R's to even solid R's. What do you make of what's happening to the Democrats here?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the generic ballot nationally. I think you have to look at individual races. You're right, Charlie Cook's report did move some of those, but I think the fact is Democrats are turning out in record numbers, and a lot of women candidates and voters want to elect women candidates this year. I think the only place you're seeing some problems, and you have them up on the screen here, California 39-49, and I would add to that California 38, where California has a jungle primary, where you have lots of Democrats running, and that provides the opportunity for 2 Republicans to top the ticket, shutting out Democrats from that. So a lot of people are looking for the Democrats who are lower in the poll numbers to drop out. That's the challenge. But otherwise, I feel very, very good about if the election's on the up and up, big question, about Democrats winning back the House.
Well, we might have to have you back to talk about that, because I know the integrity of elections was a subject of the Hill this morning. Let me ask you about this. Charlie, Super PAC fundraising way up in the 2018 election cycle. Both parties, from the official parties raising what they can, but look at the Democrats, up $207 million to the Republicans, $191 million. Over at the RNC, they would boast that they've raised more than the Democratic National Committee. But just this election will be awash in money.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The intensity and the interest in the election on both sides is pretty high. But obviously, we've seen this in some of the special elections, the intensity on the Democratic side is higher than we've probably seen in a very, very long time.
This bill, Doug Collins, Republican of Georgia, who sits on the House Judiciary and Rules
in the Senate. This affects people today. As my partner in this, Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic lead co-sponsor, says, this helps people incarcerated today. This helps those who are without hope, sitting in cells today, saying, how can we help them get the skills they need to get back into society and not come back to jail? That is the things that we're looking at.
Well, part of the opposition to this is not that they don't think they would do good things. It's that they're afraid that if this bill is passed, that you wouldn't get overall sentencing reform that they want. Take a listen to Jerry Nadler, the congressman from New York who just spoke earlier.
Despite the bill's good intentions, the new incentive system for pre-release custody credits could exacerbate racial biases, and unlike previous criminal justice efforts, is not balanced with the necessary reforms to our federal sentencing system. I wholeheartedly support certain provisions in the current version of the bill, such as expanding time credits for good behavior, banning the shackling of women prisoners, and enhanced compassionate relief. But unfortunately, these good provisions do not outweigh the potentially harmful provisions contained elsewhere in the bill.
Congressman, could you tell me, how would you defend the bill, especially when he talks about the biases that could exacerbate the problems? That's according to Nadler.
Well, I think what you also have to understand is what Nadler says is may do this. He doesn't have a good answer. In fact, right now he's voting no to keep so that women will still be shackled while they're giving birth or recently give birth. He's voting no to compassionate release. He's voting no to fixing the problem of good time credit. He's voting no against all of the good that he's talked about on the possibility of something that he determines may be bad. Capitol Hill is about the art of the possible. The president has laid forth and saying it's time for redemption. It's time to give the tools to these inmates so that when they get out, they can have productive lives. It's beyond me to see why someone would want more, which I'll do. I would like to see sentencing reform and other things. But this is about the art of the possible. And to vote no today, let's make it very clear. You're voting no and saying that you support these policies because you're not willing to move forward on a bill in which we have before us right now.
You say it will pass the House, and tell me about your plans to try to help get it through the Senate, which is always a little bit more difficult.
Well, we've already started. Senator Corner and Senator Whitehouse have been stalwarts on this. They understand that we would like to see more. They would like to see a bigger bill. But at this point in time, again, it goes back to what we said about the art of the possible. In dealing with the administration, the president has said he supports this. Jared Kushner has been a great help in helping getting the administration on board. The House and the Senate have been working intricately together. I think we're going to see a good result when we get over there. There may be some dealings in the legislative process, but we feel very good about getting it out of the House and getting it to the Senate.
In your home state today, there's a primary election. I know that social issues are certainly important on the Republican side of things. Is this something that you think should be a part of the Republican platform going forward? I mean, it really smacks to me, reminds me of compassionate conservatism. Seems to make a lot of sense if we want to help people actually not return to prison after they do their time and they get out.
Why would we not want to let them, give them the tools to not come back to prison? Look, over 90% of the people who go to prison will come home. The question then becomes, and what I have said many times, is an M&M issue. It's a money and morals issue. The state of Georgia, Oklahoma, Texas, Kentucky, many of these in New York and California have done this to where we see not only a savings in our incarceration dollars, but we're seeing a better recidivism rate where they come home and they get jobs. They become mothers and sons and daughters and husbands again. This is something that we can fight. Yes, this is something we need to come forward on, because this is what conservatives believe. Conservatives believe in redemption. Conservatives believe in a second chance. Conservatives believe that government ought to do what it's supposed to do and give people the tools to be all that I believe God created them to be.
All right, Congressman Doug Collins, thanks for coming on today. Appreciate it.
Thanks much. Good to see you.
A first for the New York Stock Exchange, what the Wall Street institution has never done before in its 226-year history. Plus, Starbucks does a complete 180 on its bathroom policy. Be its first next president. She'll be the first woman to lead the exchange in 226 years. Cunningham starts her new job on Friday. The 43-year-old had been the chief operating officer of the NYSE Group. She started her career there in 1994 as an intern. Could learn a lot from her. Right, Starbucks rolling out the welcome mat to everyone. The coffee chain's new policy allows the public to sit in its cafes and use the restrooms with no purchase necessary. The change comes after 2 African-American men were arrested in Philadelphia store, setting off a firestorm of reaction over racial bias. Christina Partsenevelis, I hope I said that right, is outside of a Starbucks in New York City. Christina.
Yes, you did say it right. And you don't have to get a venti macchiato or a pumpkin spice latte in order to sit in Starbucks or use its bathroom. This is because Starbucks is trying to be more inclusive. Like you mentioned, in April, there were 2 African-American men who were seated in a Starbucks. They refused to buy any products. The employee did call the police on those 2 African-American men, and so that created a big social media uproar. And then very recently, actually, just about 5 days ago, there was another situation with a Starbucks employee that wrote a racial slur on a cup to a customer. What we do know, though, from this Starbucks location, I'm in downtown Manhattan right now, and customers seem to be overwhelmingly positive regarding the guest policy change. Listen in.
I'm in and out of Starbucks, so I never sit in there, so it doesn't really affect me.
It's a private business. If that's what they want to do and they're being accommodating, good for them.
Ridiculous thing. This is what the country's down to? Someone's bathrooms? Come on.
I need to preface that we are at a Midtown location where you have people that are coming in and out. They're not sitting here. It's not the study crowd. It's not usually the entrepreneur crowd, because I did have a lot of comments on Twitter, viewers upset, saying that they are worried and concerned that Starbucks will turn into a haven for drug users and the homeless. So that has been a big concern for a lot of these customers going forward. We do know that next Tuesday, Starbucks will be hosting a racial media or racial bias sensitivity training for all customers. Over 8,000 stores will be shut for half a day next Tuesday in order to train employees regarding racial bias. Back to you.
All right, Christina, thank you. Take a look at this, a live look at the White House as Sarah Sanders is about to take the podium. We will go there live as soon as the briefing starts and talk about a baby boom, why one firehouse is stocking up on diapers.